Hello, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. A slightly different subject for me, although, of course, it's all related to the overall big plan that is coming down the tubes for us. You know about the Dutch farmers. We've seen them recently in their big tractors protesting. We know that there's a problem with nitrate, which apparently is being pushed as a means to get farmers to stop farming. And it could be that it's being over-egged. We're going to find out a little bit about that. That's going on in the Netherlands, but that's not an isolated case by any means, because down here in jolly old England, in fact on the south coast, right down on the Solent, we have similar issues. So in order to find out what's going on, I'm going to talk to Steve Mathews, who's from the Inshore Warsash Group. Now, I've been to Warsash, around that area. It's near Fareham, near Portsmouth. It's a lovely area. It's a beautiful bit of the Solent there. You see across to the Isle of Wight, that sort of thing. To be honest, I didn't know there was a fishing community down there. I ought to, because there's plenty of boats and things in that area. But and it's an area that historically has been interesting, because I know from Julia, whose parents are down there, the whole area used to be an amazing strawberry growing horticultural centre, taking strawberries up to London and all over, and they still do a little bit of it there today. However, let's find out how the nitrate problem is affecting the fishermen and the whole area, and what its connection is to do with housing. Steve, thank you so much for joining me.
Hello there, Rick.
It's lovely to have you on the show. I hope I've cobbled together that intro more or less about right.
I mean, you couldn't have done it better. I mean, it's excellent what you just said, because it pretty much encapsulates what's been going on with the Solent, and not a lot of people actually know about the issue with nitrate in the Solent.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, first of all, could you just tell us what nitrate is? Because it's a word that's bandied around. We know it's connected to farming.
Yes.
And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that, so that we can then see why it would be a problem.
Okay. So, as with what the issue is in the Netherlands, there are many forms of nitrate which can end up in the aquatic environment. So that includes the sea as well as rivers. So the main source of nitrate that's affected the Solent over the years comes from runoff from farming. So we're talking about the fertilizers and also the manure as well, which is applied to the land. That ends up going into the water, what we call the watershed, which is really like the water table. And it takes a certain period of time to do that, but it finds its way down into the rivers and the streams, and eventually will get into the sea. So that's not usually an issue if it's the open sea, but the Solent historically has had an issue with nitrates because it's not actually the open sea, because you've got the Isle of Wight there.
It's a channel, isn't it? It's a big wide channel, effectively.
Yes, well, like you said in that podcast, when you went down to the area, it is like a small a channel, but when you're actually on it, it feels like a lake, but it's
right.
kind of like an inland river with a big bulge in it, but it's tidal, obviously. So it obviously flushes each day with the tide cycle, but it's because of the Isle of Wight and the way that the currents move in the Solent, and anybody that owns a fishing boat or has been sea angling in the Solent would know, the movement of the waters means that the currents are retained a little bit longer than they would be if it was the open sea. So nitrate, which mainly comes from the fertilizer from farmers, over the years, probably for about 30 years, has meant that the seaweed grows quite prolifically in the Solent, and it's mainly a mobile seaweed which moves around with the tides. So it has been a bit of an issue with the fishermen over the years, especially if you're using nets.
Right. I was just going to ask what. So you've got an overgrowth of seaweed that is clogging up nets.
It can do, yes.
Yeah.
So for the last 30 years, if you own a fishing boat, commercial fishing boat in the Solent, and you're trying to lay nets in the inshore zone, because the seaweed tends to gather on the contours of the topography of the seabed, you're taking a big chance, because the chances are you'll get what we call weeded up. So that can happen quite a bit. So yeah, nitrate is an issue. You may have heard some people sort of playing it down, related to what's going on, in the Netherlands. But I can tell you it is an issue, especially in inshore waters like the Solent, and also in rivers as well. You might have heard the River Wye up, further up in England is having problems because of the phosphate mainly, which comes off the land.
And is this nitrate is coming from industrialized farming?
Mainly, the main source of nitrate comes from intensive farming.
Yes.
And as I say, that's one source of nitrate, but the other source is human sewage. So,
right.
So although sewage is treated and the nasties are taken out, the bacterial content, because they treat it with ultraviolet light, and then they usually discharge to sea all round the coast of any Western nation. That's how they do it. But in previous decades, they used to release a lot of the effluent into the local rivers. Now, they've stopped doing that now, which is really good, because we've actually seen an improvement in some of the seaweed issues that we're getting. And the Environment Agency has also cracked down on some of the farming practices, and they're working with farmers, apparently. So the amount of nitrate, it's really nitrogen compounds, really, Richard, but we use the term nitrate. The amount of nitrate going into the Solent has reduced quite a lot, I would say, within the last few years, but we're still seeing issues. So we don't actually know what the minimum concentration of nitrate is that's going to trigger seaweed growth. But yeah, it's the stuff coming off the land is improved, but although they treat sewage and it gets discharged to sea, they don't actually take out the nitrate. So there's no method that they can use unless they invest millions of pounds to actually take nitrate out. So it's still going into the sea. And of course, in the Solent, that makes seaweed grow. And in recent years, why I was drawn into all of this was because the house building in Hampshire, as you probably know, has exploded in recent years. And the local council had announced that they were going to build another 1,000 houses in Warsash, which is where we have our fishing boats.
And the knock-on effect of them doing that is more effluent being pumped into the sea. Is that what it would be?
Yeah. Well, so what they say is they say that the treated sewage, because it's treated, we got very good clean fisheries in the Solent, except for the seaweed issue, which is making the seaweed grow. So they say that they discharge to sea, but the problem is the discharge areas where they take the sewage from the housing burden, most of South Hampshire actually, is in the far eastern part of the Solent. So that means that although it's technically discharged to sea, obviously when the tide turns, the nitrate comes back into the Solent. And then if there's any seaweed there, it feeds the growth of the seaweed in the summertime. So we don't really have much of a problem in the winter, but it's mainly a summertime thing.
And I suppose the demand for fish goes up a bit more in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't actually affect the fishing, the price of fish or the quality of the fish or anything like that.
No, I was just thinking about your nets getting, if the demand is higher and you're trying to get the quota in,
Yeah, well,
And
for example, yeah, that's a good point actually. So we've got one of our affiliated members who works from Lymington, and I had a little chat with him earlier a few days ago, and he said that he couldn't actually get to one of the spots where he traditionally fished with fixed nets for species like Dover sole because the seaweed was so bad until the end of September. So that's obviously affected his fishery. So yeah, it can have an effect.
right. So does it die off? I mean, I don't know really anything about seaweed other than that
Yeah,
Worthing, where I live, used to have a big problem with it, and I believe it used to wash up on the seafront, and farmers were permitted to come and take whatever they want. And then the
yeah,
council decided, oh, look at them, they're taking us. We could make some money out of this, so they charged them, and the farmers said, on your bike, mate, you get rid of it.
yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
Yes, it can do. Probably
so
20 years ago, it got really bad. And if you
yeah,
went for a walk down Leon Solent, you would see a lot of red seaweed chucked up on the beaches. And that's
mm,
because then we had like the triple whammy. We had fertilizer runoff. We had the water companies who were still discharging into the estuary, which is Southampton Water and Hamble. And we also had the main burden of nitrate from the discharge pipes down the eastern part of the Solent. So it's like a triple whammy.
mm.
That's got a lot better. But with increasing housing, and I'll try to get into that, why I got drawn into that,
Mm.
we're obviously not certain how much nitrate is still going to go into the Solent and whether it will actually solve the problem that we have. So it's all a little bit of a guess at the moment.
Just as a matter of interest, does nitrate affect the fish, and does nitrate get into the fish? And if people are eating the fish, are they ingesting nitrate, and is that a bad thing? Do you
No,
know?
no, it doesn't affect. As far as we know, it doesn't affect. In fact, shellfish actually remove nitrate from
Oh,
the
okay.
system as well. So it's not an issue with the quality of the fishery in that way. But yes, so I expect you probably want to know how I got into this.
Do tell us.
Yeah. So, well, our family have always had a little fishing boat in Warsash for many years since the 1970s because my dad was involved with the Solent oyster fishery, which was a big industry in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And oysters were rediscovered there in about 1970. So I grew up with a fishing boat in the family from an early age. So the one we've got in the family at the moment has been in the family since 1976, which is
Lovely.
quite a few years now. But I didn't actually work it myself until about 20 years ago. So I went away and studied science and worked in that field for a few years. But when I came back to the area, I took on the fishing boat. And within a few years of me taking it on, the Solent oyster fishery started to decline. So there were like environmental changes that were going on, and we think seaweed was one of the issues because by I think it was 2006, the oyster fishery disappeared. So something had changed in the environment. And at that time, we had a predator which came in and ate the oysters. It's like a little mollusk which grows in the sea, and it actually eats the oysters, and they're called tingle whelks. So we had these kind of conflict of things that were going on, and we ended up losing the oysters. So I took an interest in what was going on in the environment, and so that was one of the things that kind of piqued my interest. And then I was noticing also an increase in housing development in the area, which had been an ongoing thing. So I was interested in that as well because of like you said at the beginning, the area was quite well known for the strawberries. So that was in my mind. And then about 2015, the council announced that they were going to build another 1,000 houses in Warsash, which is the village where we have our fishing boats. So I then got drawn into the question of what they actually were going to do to enable that building to happen. So what happened was we found out that we're going to build all these houses, which were on the last of the strawberry growing fields in the area, and I just went along to one of the meetings, like, as you do, one of the council meetings, because a friend of mine had got interested in it, and he oddly enough, he was the son of a builder, but he could see that there was a hell of a lot of development going on, and he was obviously concerned about it. So I said, well, I'll go along to the meeting, and just see what they're saying. So I went along to the meeting, and then at that meeting, Richard, they announced that the government regulator, which is Natural England, do you know, the one that looks at the environment? They had decided that the features in the Solent that they were responsible for, because of the nitrate, were in a poor state. Okay. And the council leader at that time, I think this was about 2018, then announced that he would have to put all housing on hold until they sorted out this nitrate problem, because they were afraid that with the extra sewage burden from the housing estates, even though they treat the sewage, they weren't taking the nitrate out.
Yes.
They were afraid that that was actually going to mean that Natural England would be, pulled over hot coals for not doing its job and looking after these features in the Solent. So I was at this meeting and I thought, well, blimey, that's, a big deal. They were actually going to stop the housing development.
Yes.
But I always remember this, because the operative phrase was, until we can find a solution to allow development to continue.
I see. Yeah. So they're keen on having the development, come what may. They just got to find a solution.
Yes. And I literally got into my car and I thought, I wonder what that's actually going to be, until we can find a solution to enable development to continue. So I started to research it, and there was another group called the Save Warsash group that I wasn't connected to. And a friend of the fishermen said, look, you really ought to go and speak to them, because you know all about seaweed and you know that the nitrate's feeding the seaweed. And I started to look into it, and we found out what the Natural England solution was going to be. I don't know if you know what I'm going to say next, but it turned out that they were going to take land out of production, out of farm production, and then trade. They were going to come up with this scheme called nitrate offsetting, which is including taking farms out of production. So, because when a developer, it's quite a technical thing this, so I'll try to get it right, but when a developer wants to build, say, 1,000 houses, obviously that's going to create a sewage burden because of the occupancy, because humans make sewage. So the sewage would be taken off-site, treated, and the nitrate would go into the Solent. Now, what they proposed to do was to take a farm out of production in the Solent catchment, which includes the Isle of Wight, which is basically all the land where the fertilizer from a field would drain off. They would then create, by taking it out of production, they would create a system of nitrate credits, where the developer, if the sewage burden was greater than what it would be if a farmer farmed the land, if they just didn't develop it, because most of it's going on green fields, right? They would then come up with a a trading system. They called that nitrate credits. So this was the solution that they were going to come up with to allow development to continue.
So they would take farms out of production and effectively put more houses on there, but they had to have a balance so that the amount of houses didn't produce too much nitrate, although the nitrate was no longer there because they got rid of the farmers.
Yeah, so if you can imagine, they wanted to build 1,000 houses in Warsash. So they will look at the land that the building is going to go on, and they will decide whether the nitrate arising from the housing estate is greater than what it would have been if they'd carried on
farming.
Farming it. That's it, Richard.
Yes.
So if there was a surplus, the developer will then have to purchase offset credits from rewilded land. So the irony of it is they have to take a farm out of production somewhere else within the South Hampshire Solent catchment, right?
And rewild it.
Yeah, that then creates a pool of credits called nitrate credits, which the developer can then build, and then they declare their housing estate nitrate neutral. So that was the method that they came up with to allow, business as usual.
Yes. And they're doing this with the carbon, the CO2, aren't they? They're doing the same sort of thing across all over the place with this idea of carbon offsetting, so that we can do this industrial project by ultimately affecting farming, which of course is affecting all of us, because what do farmers do? Oh yes, that's right. They grow food.
That's right.
And rewilding, lovely as it might be, is not putting anything on the table.
No. So the reason why I got drawn into it was because the way that they calculate the system, that they declared the system was going to create a nitrate neutral system in the Solent. Okay. But when a farmer is farming the land and the nitrate from the fertilizer goes into the Solent, it does that very slowly. So it goes through the geology over a period of like 10 years before it gets to the sea. But when you are taking nitrate from a housing estate via the sewage burden, treating the sewage, putting it into the sea, it's a direct delivery. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, no, absolutely. It's just pumped straight in there as opposed to gently leaching over time. So
what they did, when we looked into it, what they initially did was they took a farm out of production on the Isle of Wight. Do you know where the ferries go in at
yes.
Creek, which is Fishbourne?
Yes.
Well, that creek, Wootton Creek, which is known to our local fishermen because we fish along Osborne Bay. Behind Wootton Creek, there was a farm called Ducksworth Farm. So the Wildlife Trust brought the farm and they rewilded it. And then they used that for their pool of credits to carry on building on the mainland, like 12 miles away. So it's kind of odd because you've got this offsetted land on the Isle of Wight, which has got no connection whatsoever with the village of Warsash in this case, although it's going on everywhere. And then they can create this credit system to allow, developers to continue building. I mean, they've already signed off the green fields anyway, but where they've come unstuck is with the Solent because of the nitrate issue. So now they're kind of weirdly using it as leverage to sort of make out that their housing developments are not going to be, adding to the detriment of the ecology. But we don't actually know that for sure.
Yes, you'll only know it once it's built and it's irreversible.
Yeah, and it's not just the 1,000 houses in Warsash. They're building I think there's 50,000 between where we are in Warsash all the way up to Winchester, and there's probably going to be God knows how many more in decades to come. So,
yes.
so that was the basic thing was that we discovered. And the Save Warsash campaign, who were the residents in Warsash, they had obviously come up against all this and were trying to sort of figure it out. So when I came along, I sort of said, well, there's still going to be increasing amounts of nitrate coming out of the pipes. So it didn't sort of add up. So I started to look into it.
So how can you push back against this? Have you any levers?
The only to start with,
other than public opinion, I suppose. But
well, what happened was it ended up going to the council on their hearing for the Fareham Borough Development Plan, which included the 1,000 houses in Warsash. So I said to the Save Warsash campaign, I'll go along and I'll explain it from the perspective of the fishery, that we weren't satisfied that when they say it's going to be nitrate neutral, on paper it looks like nitrate neutrality, because they calculate the nitrate from the land and then they calculate the nitrate from the sewage burden, but they're not the same. Because if they left the land, it would go down through the geology slowly. So it's not a fair equivalency. But they pretended that it was.
Yes.
Natural England, well, not pretended, that's the wrong word to use. They assumed it was. And their working model was based on the assumption that the nitrate was exactly the same. But it's not, because as I just said, one is delivered from the pipe.
And presumably there's enough examples in practice now with where houses have been built, farmland has been taken out of production, to prove that there is more nitrate coming from an extensive housing production than the farm, just looking at historically. There has to be enough examples now to show that this is not as honest as they're putting it forward.
Well, when we went to the hearing, Richard, and I actually explained why it wasn't and also Save Warsash also explained why it wasn't a straight swap. The hearing inspector, the government inspector, just pretty much ignored what we said and sided with the government statutory advisor, which is Natural England, because they're the ones with all the scientists and everything. But it just seems like a disingenuous way to continue when the Solent was saying, look, it's kind of like the universe, isn't it? Saying, look, I've got a problem. There's seaweed overgrowth issues and you're going to have to do something about it. So they did stop all development, and they could have said, look, no more development until we've figured out exactly whether this is going to work or not. But they didn't, not within short order, with only, just 1 year, they'd already had their nitrate mitigation thing in the pipeline, which makes me think that it's actually come from somewhere else, maybe even the Netherlands. I don't know, because the same sort of stuff is going on over there. They need to build, I think it was 1 million houses in the Netherlands, and some of the farmers are saying that they're overplaying the nitrate thing there, because they might actually be trying to rewild the land and then trade that off for housing by getting rid of the farmers. So it's but
we need farmers.
Yeah, of course. So the other thing was that when we were at the council hearing, I pointed out that the area where the nitrate is being discharged in the Far Eastern Solent, we discovered that the area of discharge, the data that we were shown from the water company, which came via Save Warsash, showed the plume of nitrate going east out of the Solent into the open sea. So this kind of lended weight to their idea that it was being dispersed at sea. But from the fisherman's perspective, I discussed this with another one of our fishermen, and the first thing we kind of said was that's the flood tide plume, because it was like a modelling of the what we call the plume of nitrate.
Right.
The flood tide plume. What about the ebb tide plume, which is when the tide turns and goes back into the Solent?
Oh, I see.
But yeah, so Save Warsash campaign asked for the data on that, but they wouldn't give it to them. So presumably they didn't want to show the nitrate coming back into the Solent. So that was a very strange moment. And that, and also the fact that we talked about the differences in how the nitrate moves around through the geology. So there is a big disparity. But I expect, people probably wondering, well, so what? But what it means is that they've also now put other areas of South Hampshire under their plan for rewilding. So the latest I saw from, I think it was the South Downs website actually, was that they were going to set aside up to 30% of the downs as rewilding. So they were going to take out downland, which is now under farming, rewild it, and then use that as a pool of credit to allow housing in South Hampshire.
I know they're doing something similar in Cornwall, where they're planning on effectively eliminating all the farms in Cornwall and rewilding the land.
Right. Well,
I mean, it seems to me an enormous, great big scam.
Well,
And of course, as soon as you take every time you take out a farm, you're reducing the food consumption or the food production.
This is it. I mean, one of the farmers, I was reading in one of the farmers' weekly things online, and he kind of said, look, this is just a way of letting the developers get off the hook. And also, oddly enough, it's a way to allow government not to actually look at the drivers of housing demand, which obviously is a contentious. Well, they've made it contentious because we're not allowed to look at anything to do with population growth and migration.
Yes, exactly.
Taboo subject. So. Yes. But, I was thinking about this, Richard, because if you take it to its, its logical conclusion, you're going to end up, if you were standing up on the South Downs, you're going to be looking around at all this rewilded area. But then down in the coastal strip, which is, as you know, has changed radically over the decades, it's just going to be houses.
Yes.
So this,
it's already, if you start in Brighton and go all the way to Portsmouth, there are very few gaps where there isn't houses.
Absolutely.
And all around Sussex, and obviously in Hampshire now, the housing commitment is massive, and we have loads of protests going on saying save our land, because soon there'll be nothing, and then these rewilded lands you're not supposed to go on.
Yeah, so exactly. So I think it was Campaign to Protect Rural England. They were talking about this, and they were saying that actually you could actually build, I think it was 12 million houses on brownfield sites, but they're not. They're just taking
taking farms out. Well, from the information that I've understood over the last 12 months running these series of interviews and stuff. This is a much bigger problem than it looks on the ground, and it's so much premeditated as part of the Agenda 2030.
Right.
Yeah, and what with the depopulation agenda as well, you wonder why they've got all these houses, because apparently if you listen to the research that's done, there won't be people to put in them.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? I think CPRE, Campaign Protect Rural England, was saying that most of the houses they're building aren't really affordable anyway. So there's that. But I think there was another think tank, wasn't there, which was saying that they were going to have to build 14 cities worth the size of Birmingham in the next 20 years. I don't know if that's a real figure, but that seems like a hell of a lot of housing. So
Mm,
something like this nitrate offset scheme for South Hampshire. I mean, South Hampshire is a big area, you know.
yeah, and
It will
and if you've got the problems with the nitrate coming into the Solent and presumably all around the coastal regions of the UK, and you've got fishermen struggling to bring in enough fish to feed the existing population.
yeah.
But if these houses suggest that the population growth is going to be massive,
Hmm.
then they ain't going to have enough fish to go around.
Well, the thing is, the point of this is the reason why we questioned it was because we simply do not know whether their plans to build never-ending houses in the Solent watershed, because what I call the Solent watershed is South Hampshire. We
Hmm.
simply don't know how much nitrate is going to be coming from those pipes. It's just,
No.
and they weren't even interested in how much because as long as they can balance it out on paper, they're happy. But
Yes.
it's not really a fair equivalency.
Well,
So
somebody's obviously getting a big backhander to ensure that these developments go ahead.
absolutely, and the nitrate farm offset thing will enable that to continue untested and unchallenged. Sorry. So
Mm.
the odd thing is about this is you've actually got Natural England, which is supposed to be about the environment, and you've got the Wildlife Trust as well, who are all for this, are kind of locked in this sort of reciprocal benefit loop where no one actually has to question the validity of turning South Hampshire into a housing estate because they can kind of claim a kind of a moral, not a moral, kind of a moral high ground, you know,
Yes.
in terms of the
Well,
environment.
I do know somebody from the Wildlife Trust. I daren't say who it is, but somebody extremely high up, who I know has swallowed hook, line, and sinker, if you don't mind me using those nautical terms or fishing terms,
Yeah,
the whole global warming, net zero, we've got to have offset, we must have more of this theory,
yeah,
let's just call it that, and it is not prepared to move an iota. And I know from having visited the groundswell conference and event that was earlier this year with farmers, and
yes,
so many farmers have basically been told this is what you have to do, otherwise you won't get any grants or subsidies, whatever farmers get these days. And they're all having to follow this in order to try and survive.
yeah,
And it seems to me to be predicated on a complete and utter unfounded piece of science.
yes, and
And
you're right, it is. And Save Warsash campaign actually said, look, this is totally untested. It's only guesswork.
yes,
But I
we've
must stress, you know, the nitrate loadings from the land have been reduced and
yes,
stopped, you know, fluting treated sewage into the estuaries, which is good. But it seems that what they're doing here is kind of a bit disingenuous, I think.
yes, I
Um,
think that's true. Tell me about the area before all of this housing, because it is an interesting,
it is.
from a heritage point of view, and from from a food production point of view, because we mentioned strawberries,
Hmm.
and I know that as I mentioned at the beginning, Julia, my partner's parents, lived down there, and
Hmm.
occasionally, I mean, the housing estate that they're on was originally strawberry fields,
Yes.
and occasionally strawberry plants still come break through.
Yeah. I mean, the area that we're talking about between Southampton and Portsmouth became one of the premier strawberry growing areas after the Enclosures Act, I think it was in 1866, something like that. So it meant that land people working on the land could divvy up. They could divvy up the land, and then they found that strawberries were the ideal cash crop for the
Mm.
geology. So we've got in the area that you're talking about, you know, where you said Julia was from, and where I'm from, it was gravel. And over the gravel, it was kind of a loamy soil. So they found strawberries were a really good crop to grow because they don't like too rich a soil. So that really took off in the 19th century, and then with the coming of the railway, it got even more productive because they could
Mm.
the strawberries out of the area to London and elsewhere. So yeah, it became a really big industry, and when you sort of look back at some of the old photographs of that period, it does seem quite idyllic, but it must have been quite a hard life, I would imagine, because a lot of the dwellings they used to live in were just like shanty built
Mm.
in shacks, you know. And then as it became more successful, I suppose towards the late Victorian times, some of the strawberry growers built farmhouses out of the local brick. And if you go around the area of Warsash, Loxheath, Titchfield, Salisbury Green, you can still see some of the old.
Do you know, I was going to say exactly that because having visited the area quite a lot, and you know, you see modern houses, sort of 60s houses, 70s
Yeah,
houses, and then there is something from the
yeah,
1890s or something, you know, and it looks completely. But you can imagine that would have been a successful strawberry farmer
yeah,
who had managed to build a lovely house on the proceeds of the hard work they put into it.
exactly. And that was in fact the case. So, but now if you go around the area, you'll see those old dwellings, and then around them you got the more modern houses which have been built over the decades. I mean,
Mm.
everyone watching your podcast will be living in a dwelling which was once on a green field, you know.
Yes.
And my parents came from Southampton to live in Loxheath, in a house which was once obviously strawberry land. But even when I was growing up in the 70s, there were still remnants of the strawberry growing industry left. So you still got a sense that even though the area had become developed, it was still in balance.
Yes, and you
Um,
need those lungs of open space
yeah,
to breathe, don't you?
that's
You know, and it does seem as if they've all now been eyeballed for development.
everything's gone, Richard. So I was born in 1967, so we're probably similar age. And
Yes.
as I say, we would come out of my parents' residential area, which was once a field, obviously. Those houses were built in the 1950s. So prior to that, the strawberry growing business was still booming, you know, up till World War II.
Mm.
Then a lot of the landowners, some of the bigger strawberry growers started to sell their land for housing. And at that time, it would have been classified as overspill housing from, you know, towns like Fareham and Southampton and Portsmouth. But it kind of stopped. So when I was growing up, you know, in the 1970s, I think I was about two or three, and we could actually my must have been a bit older than three, but I remember one of my first memories going out of the residential area straight into a strawberry field. You know,
Mm.
and, you could sort of smell the scent of strawberries on the air with all
Lovely.
of the butterflies and bees and everything else. But
Well, I mean, that is the other thing, isn't it? That
so,
the farming and the openness and the hedgerows and all of that around was providing a wildlife and corridors for wildlife so
yes,
that you could live together
yes,
with humans and all their sort of big, you know, diesel guzzling cars and all the stuff that were plastics and all the stuff that we have. But at least you could have the wildlife had some habitat. But it does sound now as if, I mean, apart from these isolated wildlife, rewilded spots in and around the conurbation,
yeah.
there's going to be nothing,
Well,
just tarmac and brick and
and as I said, the bizarre thing is they're using the rewilded spots to justify carrying on building in the Solent watershed.
yeah.
I mean, that is kind of odd in itself. But yeah,
So
so
so there's no real end to this then.
I don't really see, because technically with the nitrate mitigation scheme that they've come to produce for Hampshire, they could justify carrying on and on and on. So I don't really
Mm.
see that it will actually end. But yeah, so the strawberry growing period was must have been quite amazing. Really, I'd love to be able to go back in time and see what it
Well,
was.
wouldn't we all?
But yeah, it changed quite a bit through the 70s again, and then it kind of stopped. And when I took the fishing boat on 20 years ago, I got to know some of the old strawberry growers
Right.
who were then like in their 80s and
Yes.
were retired. But I would always ask them, well, what was it like, growing up in this area? And I would get all the stories about what it was like and how the industry started to fail. So there were very interesting forces that were going on at the time. So one of the things was that they used to be able to burn the old strawberry beds at the end of the life of a strawberry bed, and this would kill the pests in the soil and funguses. But the rules changed. I don't know when that was, and they weren't able to set fire to the strawberry beds at the end of the year. And there was a nice old anecdote I heard that if you came into the strawberry growing area, you could smell the scent of burnt strawberry jam because they were burning the fields.
Yes,
so that was kind of a nice thing. And then one of the elderly ladies that I got to know, who'd been a strawberry grower, she said that they had a chance in the late 60s into the early 70s, when there were still fields left, of having kind of a renaissance, because they were told that they would be joining the common market. Right?
Yeah.
So they would be able to sell their strawberries abroad. But then she said what actually happened was it was the nail in the coffin of the South Hampshire strawberry industry, because what really happened is that they got cheap imports from Spain and they couldn't compete. So then, of course, it all slowly went to housing.
It's a very sad story, Steve, that you have brought to us just before Christmas. Thanks for that. But it is but it's something that we've got to address somehow. I mean, I don't know how we address this, because it seems as if those that are in power are absolutely determined to wreck the countryside.
I don't think. So you see,
are you more optimistic than I am?
Well, I don't know, because I mean, housing demand, the drivers of housing demand are clear. It's to do with population growth, and the drivers of population growth includes, whether you want to face it or not, movement of people and migration. And I think the population growth is out of control. I think a lot of people believe that and see that. So I don't really see that it's going to change. They clearly aren't interested in doing what CPRE are saying, which is to build on more and more brownfield sites.
No. So, well, perhaps they will build on the brownfield sites once they've finished building on all the green sites.
Wow, this is the thing, isn't it, Richard? I mean, where does it end?
And the whole country will be effectively one big concrete mass.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm arguing for is a kind of a balance between the two, and we kind of already had that. I think I said that to you in the email that we exchanged. We already had that in this area. So they could have, if there'd been more vision, they could have said, look, we're not going to do any more of this infilling. We're going to stop. We're going to encourage horticultural businesses providing that they farm in a sustainable way and don't put too much nitrate on the soil and all the rest of it. We can have a balance between development and, horticultural and also wilded areas as well. But you can't do that if you're having to keep up with the housing burden with population growth. What was it last year? Do you know?
No.
It's massive.
I mean, as you say, it is completely out of control, and we are only an island. And I know people often go, "Oh, but there's plenty of space. There's plenty of space to build on, and all of this." But then, if you're going to rewild great sections like all of Cornwall, and you take all these farms out of production, these mouths that are living inside these houses do need something to eat. And as
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, Bill Gates's mealworms and his synthetic burgers is not going to cut the mustard.
No, absolutely not. I mean, they're building a whole new town north of Fareham, which has been earmarked for 20 years. And if you go up to Basingstoke, they're building one south east of Basingstoke as well,
Yeah,
southwest of Basingstoke, all
it's
on
it's
pristine environments, you know.
yeah, on good growing land, you know.
Yeah,
Steve, I'm going to draw this to a close. Thank you for telling us about the situation.
you're very well.
I shall be back that way over the Christmas period, and I shall be looking at it with slightly different eyes, I can tell you. And I shall alert Juliet's parents to this and say, what do you think? But thank you so much for coming on and explaining it. I have a suspicion that this is happening all around the country and not just this country.
Yeah. Well, the
And
nitrate, yeah, I think they've come stuck with the Solent because of the nitrate stuff. But
right,
they're building on greenfields anyway. But,
yeah, they're hell bent on it.
they're hell bent on it. Yeah.
Steve, thank you so much.
You're
Really
very welcome.
appreciate it.
Yeah, very welcome.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back with more monologues and interviews, of course. But I hope this does not upset your Christmas when you're looking in an empty larder, looking for something to eat, and thinking, "Oh, there's another building site just coming up on that little bit of green I've seen outside." Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that.
Right, Richard. Yeah, I hope it's clear.
I think so. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Have a good one. And until next time, from Steve and myself, goodbye.